one, and go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to PHP Dublin May 2021. My name is Barry O'Sullivan. I'll be hosting the meetup for this evening, and we have a special speaker tonight, Ismael Velasco, and he is here to talk about scalable APIs, which is something I'm very interested to hear about. Just so people know, we are going to have a talk, which will be about 40 to 50 minutes, and then a 10-minute Q&A session at the end, which can go on depending on how many questions there are. If you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the chat, and we will get to them. And just keep in mind that there is a 10 to 15 second delay between the stream to YouTube. So we won't see your question straight away, or it might be a little out of sync, but we'll try to work within that. So I think without further ado, Ismael, take it away.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here. I'm going to try and share my screen. Quick disclaimer, I have had some issues with my connectivity, so if everyone can pray right now, that will be much appreciated.
I'm on it.
Here it goes. Can you see my screen okay? The obligatory introductory sentence to any presentation. Fantastic. So, yes, hello. I'm Ismael Velasco. I'm a Mexican cosmopolite living in Wales, UK, in Newport. I work for BibSync. I'm a PHP developer, also a NASA space program engineer. Only one of those is true. Maybe by the end of this, you'll guess which. You can find me on Twitter at @DevOnAJourney. And I'd love you to join me. I recently joined the Twitter community, and it's been fantastic, really. Some really wonderful conversations. People complain about Twitter all the time, but I think as long as you keep control over your feed, it's a fantastic space to liaise and connect and learn. So please do hit me up. And I'm going to sort of cover quite a lot, which means that I'll be sort of taking a bird's eye view rather than drilling in depth. And I will explore kind of the state of the API economy, some issues around scalability, the state of specifications today, the API first concept, and then I'm going to focus a little bit on Postman and Zapier as two relevant tools. So first of all, the API economy, this is a term that kind of came sort of around 10 years ago, but it's grown and grown in relevance. And although APIs have been around in some form or other since the 60s, really things have suddenly taken off. One metric would be the Programmable Web, which is a collection of APIs out there. They have something around 30,000 APIs now. And this is obviously a tiny, tiny proportion of the APIs that are out there. But I think what matters is kind of the curve, as it were. You can see how exponentially things have been growing. And we have moved from a state where APIs were a tool that we used, or even just a programming concept, to where they have become an ecosystem that we exist within. Another sort of metric or proxy would be Rapid API, which is an API marketplace, which has 35,000 APIs today, 3 million developers, and makes 1 trillion API calls. So this is beginning to show that actually sort of we are now increasingly in an interactive space where APIs are ubiquitous and hard to escape. Postman began with in 2012. By 2014, we had 500,000 developers. Today it has 15 million developers using the Postman platform and 50 million active Postman collections. So a Postman collection is a collection of endpoints, essentially, and requests that you use to develop and test your API. So when you're saying that 15 million developers are on Postman or 3 million developers are on Rapid API, what you're saying is that APIs have become a relationship, not something that just that you use for your own app, but actually there is now a genuine economy. There is a genuine ecosystem of which we are part. And thinking about scalability is really to predict, in a sense, that this is where you will be moving. Whatever API you are creating, really you need to think about the pressures that are likely to make your API part of a broader ecosystem that needs to talk to complete strangers. And maybe right now your product does not do that. It's not a public API, but it is not unlikely that time carrying on at some point, it might be. Of course, it's not just this external public sphere, this discursive sphere that APIs have gone into, but also the cloud has made APIs part of scaling. So this is the API Death Star. This is the Amazon microservices architecture. And of course, there is a similar Death Star for Netflix, etc. Amazon kind of pioneered this microservice infrastructure at scale, and it's become a bigger and bigger thing. Of course, now there's also plenty of kind of counter blogs where microservices are going back to the monolith, and you even have sort of hybrid monolith microservice architectures. But I think the point I'm kind of trying to make is that this approach toward an API ecosystem is something that is happening both internally and externally. It's something that people are finding is a good solution for scaling both your interaction as a product and your monetization as a product by opening up your app and making it part of that API marketplace, of that API ecosystem, but also as a way of scaling internally once you reach a certain level of complexity. This is probably premature if you're right at the start, and I would probably recommend a monolith to start with. But at some point, microservices architecture with an API ecosystem internally, it might come to be a solution if you're successful. Which takes us to the question of scalability. And I think there are sort of two dimensions to the scalability of an API. One is traffic. You get really successful, lots and lots and lots of people use your API. And another one is complexity. Your app continues to grow. The demands, the requirements of your product, of the marketplace continue to evolve. So your API needs to scale in complexity, in structure. And so there are two types of considerations around scaling. And some are API specific. So API design, API observability, API versioning, and others are API adjacent, infrastructure, code quality, code optimization. That sort of thing is obviously critical to scaling up your API, but it's not part of the API itself. And really your API should be able to cope with changing infrastructures, moving from hard metal to the cloud, for example, or and obviously your API has to be sort of platform independent. So really the code quality, you should be able to completely swap the code, as it were, move from PHP to Node, back to PHP to Go, and ideally your API should remain resilient and constant. And again, code optimization will be part of that scaling, but all of these areas are adjacent to the API. And I'm kind of going to focus a little bit more on the API side of things. And those three things that I have kind of highlighted are, I think, some of the core considerations in terms of scaling your API. One is, how do you design your API for evolution and communication? No, those two dimensions that I saw at the beginning of scale. So one is sort of entering this big marketplace where lots of people will be talking to your API, or lots of services will be talking to each other through APIs. And likewise, how do you observe the performance of your API, of each endpoint? How do you test that its response times are correct, that the data is what you expect, etc.? And then how do you version your API sort of as it evolves? And really, I think there are no formulae. There is no kind of magic bullet. I think these are trade-offs and dilemmas that you meet at different points. And one, I suppose, caveat to this is what some people suggest you should really think as though your product was already going to explode when you're designing it. Others suggest actually don't over-design, don't design for that massive expansion or complexity, because you don't really know what your changing requirements might be over time. And I suspect the answer lies in the middle. The answer lies in creating structures that are flexible and scalable and that don't overcommit you one way or another. So what are the design considerations around being able to create a scalable API? So one element is platform independence. Your API should not be dependent on the code that underpins it. And this is obviously something that is a kind of optimal concept, but in reality, very often, particularly when you're creating a single page application, for example, you will kind of code your app and then build your API at the end of it. Once you've got your fantastic application, the back end, you'll come up with a set of API endpoints and structures and maps that fit your application. The challenge to that is that actually that can couple your API to your application. It can then become sort of quite hard to really change the platform and evolve your API. So thinking around that platform independence means that you also require an element of predictability. Your endpoints should be predictable. They should follow a logic that you and others can predict, so that as it grows in a predictable fashion. And they should be interoperable. The way that you generate data should be part of that predictability. And so it should be able to speak to other APIs in a coherent, predictable way. And it should be evolvable. The structure, the architecture, the naming conventions that you create for your API should be flexible enough that you can keep expanding and minimizing the need for breaking changes, for versioning, because there is actually no clean solution to versioning. There's always a kind of trade-off. If you choose to version like most people version with V1, V2 in the namespace, of course, then you create a pain for anybody who sort of wants to move to the next version because they're a bit nervous about it. So you end up maintaining separate versions. And you're breaking pure REST, as it were, if you're using REST conventions. But if you are kind of doing it all in the headers, then you are going to more esoteric spaces. So your API becomes a little bit less usable, and there are sort of issues around caching, etc. So you really want to create your API in ways that minimize those kinds of shifts. So what is the best way to do this? And the best way to do this is to follow specifications. This is why specifications exist. They exist to create standards that are predictable, that are platform independent, that are evolvable, and that are, above all, interoperable. So you choose a specification and you follow it. And the more closely you follow it, the more scalable the API-specific dimensions are likely to be. Now, the current state of these specifications is in flux, and it's evolving. So I owe this set of slides to the creator of Async API, who created this. Fran Mendes is his name, and he created these slides that are a really good overview of the state of specifications. So you have the standards at the top, and some of the API languages, description languages at the bottom. So REST is obviously the kind of go-to and gold standard for web APIs. And they use JSON schema, RAML, and more recently OpenAPI, which used to be Swagger. And OpenAPI is probably the one that has the most current momentum behind it. And it's really the one to embrace. It was sort of donated to the open source community by Swagger. It became part of the OpenAPI Foundation. And it has been evolving. And quite excitingly, the latest version has just come out a couple of months ago, and it incorporates. It used to be for a long time that JSON schema and OpenAPI were not fully compatible, so you had to do a bit of transformations. But now OpenAPI, the latest version, is fully harmonious with JSON schema. So that's a fantastic win for the ecosystem. The downside is that version, 3.0, I think it is so recent that the tooling is still catching up. So we still haven't gotten to the point at which the tooling is all there to reflect the latest version. So you might need to start at 2.0 and then, or not 0.0, I forget what it was, but 2.x, and move up to 3 soon. You have to kind of monitor the situation. But basically, OpenAPI can be described in YAML, or it can be described in JSON, and it is a very thorough sort of way of specifying what your API requires, what it expects, creating some example responses. One of the other innovations of the latest version of OpenAPI is that you're able to specify webhooks as well, thanks to Lorna Jane. So it's a fantastic spec. I won't stay too long on this because it will detract from the presentation, and also because I'm not an expert in all of the various standards. But you have the kind of new entrant GraphQL, which uses its own GraphQL specification, and you have gRPC, which uses gRPC and protobuf. And then you have Async API for messaging. So the various APIs are all synchronous. You poll, you get, you respond. That's not so ideal for event-driven architectures that might be queued, that might come in an sort of async process. So Async API, which has recently been adopted by the Linux Foundation, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of the new kid on the block that has made a fantastic splash for that kind of API, IoT, messaging, etc. And finally, you have the kind of golden oldie of SOAP using WSDL and XSD. So these are kind of the range of specifications out there. You are most likely to kind of land in the web sphere around REST and GraphQL possibly, and if you're kind of being sort of quite event-driven, into messaging, and of course, perhaps for more legacy applications into SOAP. So the point about those specifications, as I said, and this is, I think, the thing to bear in mind, specifications can feel like a bit of a pain, a bit of a kind of cognitive load, but really what they're meant to do is allow you to scale in a predictable way. They provide a structure. It's a bit like using a framework, I suppose, for web development, for software development. Specifications are a kind of framework, an opinionated framework for API design that can provide, can require perhaps an element of extra work at the beginning, but will save you a lot of pain over time as you scale. And as the API economy has grown, as the API ecosystem has grown, as the complexity of interactions has grown, as people have begun to develop apps that consume multiple APIs, the concept of API first has gained traction in recent years. And I think really the API first approach is really sort of useful to create scalable APIs, because one of the things that bites you, one of the pain points that makes scaling difficult for APIs at the design level is precisely the fact that mostly traditionally they are tagged at the end. So the primary audience are the sort of source devs, if we want to call them that, the people who are creating the application code. And so APIs have been designed often thinking not even of all of the developers developing the product in the company, but really of each developer working on each piece, developing which bit of the API, which means that APIs can evolve in a very idiosyncratic way that makes it sort of, that seems platform independent at the beginning, but once the app grows in complexity, ceases to be platform independent. And actually, it becomes really hard to scale internally, but even harder to consume. And of course, we all have probably one of the top moans and gripes of developers is trying to integrate with third-party APIs that make no sense, that have gotchas in them, that are not well documented, that are not consistent, that are not predictable. So the notion of API first came as a way of reversing this, of thinking of your application from the point of view of its consumers first. So it's not from the point of view of the developers building the application, but from the point of view of the developers consuming the application. And this actually gave us extra advantages. So the traditional in the web sphere, the traditional kind of setup was a single page application where you would have your database and your backend services, and then you would create an API that would be consumed by your front-end clients, whether they be desktop applications or mobile applications. And that allowed us to be a little bit sloppy, because really, even if your APIs didn't follow a specification closely, even if they weren't very predictable, as long as the devs kind of knew what it was doing, you could create your idiosyncratic sort of client application that would consume those endpoints. But the moment that evolved to where it wasn't just that particular one or two apps, but you were actually engaging with a multitude of apps, with your wearables, with your sort of multiple different mobile devices. And even more when your API was being consumed by other APIs, whether internal microservices or external ones, where your product was a composite of APIs. Certainly, the kind of things that worked in the SPA universe began to break down. And of course, this thinking of scalability means anticipating that at some point your API might look like the image on the right. And the thing is that even if it doesn't, if you follow the practices that make sense to the image on the right, you will save yourself development time, debugging time, and sort of design time, even on the upper image. So, but the point of API first was to make the specification, the contract, the single source of truth, not the code. That was the way that you ensured that platform independence. It was by actually creating the API before the platform even exists. So it's code first setting. You would get into your IDE and write your code, and then you would kind of check it into GitLab or GitHub and integrate it and deploy it, and then so that it would be kind of consumed through. In this case, this I obviously got this from a Postman graphic, but basically you would kind of eventually write your tests, debug, and document at the end. First, you would create your entire application, and only at the end you would sort of begin to refine your API. In the API first flow, you actually begin by designing your entire API before a single line of code has been written. So you design all your endpoints, you mock them, you write your tests before the code starts. And then you start creating the code that will return the data expected by your contract, by your API design. And that will sort of meet the test that you have already created. And you will then version it, and the cycle will carry on. And what that allows you is not only to create that kind of predictability, that platform independence, that stability of API that allows you to scale, but it actually also makes it possible for you to work on your front end and your back end simultaneously. Whereas in the past, for example, a new feature for your SPA, your backend had to be completed, the API exposed, the data generated, and then your front-end developer could start working. In the API first ecosystem, you would create the contract, which is, say, your OpenAPI spec, which says, I have all of these paths, and these paths will require, using JSON schema or OpenAPI, will require these types of data and will return these types of data. And here is an example response that I expect. And that will allow you, using Postman, for example, to generate mock servers that basically take that documentation and generate a whole bunch of requests. And those requests are therefore consumable already by your front end. So your front end can already start designing everything whilst consuming the contract. And because they know the contract is a single source of truth, then there is no worry. Your API is absolutely predictable. And if you're building a microservices architecture, other APIs can start consuming. You can have, for example, 3 backend APIs that depend on this new API, but because you already have that specification fully developed and your mock server is spitting out that data, then you can even start creating. It's not just that your front end and your back end teams can work in parallel. you can actually have different services being built at the same time that depend upon one another before those services exist. So that's quite a powerful gain in terms of development process. And it's also one that protects you because it's a test-driven development. You already have the test. When your sort of backend team finally pushes the implementation, it should be able to replace the mock server without changing what comes out that has been being consumed all this time by the front-end teams and other APIs. So moving to this API first process flow and architecture is one of the key ways, I think, of building these scalable APIs. It can be quite hard to migrate an existing API to an API first pseudo approach, so to speak. And I think nevertheless, it's still worth doing. So what that would look like is that you would turn whatever API you have into a specification. And that specification would live somewhere like in your own company workspace in Postman. And you would create the set of tests, etc., that would work. And then you would be able to keep developing it in an API first way. So once you've kind of sort of migrated to this way of working, then any new development, any new endpoints, any new functionality gets created first in your API spec and only then built in code. So which sort of takes me to Postman. Now, unfortunately, I was hoping to move directly into Postman, but I'm not going to risk it because I've had such sort of bad connectivity issues. So I'm going to just talk through Postman using this this previous setup to get you an idea of what is possible. And obviously, you can follow up by going to the actual application. So what is Postman? Most people know Postman as an HTTP client. We will use it simply to quickly make a GET or a POST request and check that the response is what you expect. But Postman has been evolving and evolving and evolving. And I think it, again, a bit like OpenAPI, the center of gravity is shifting in its direction. There is an interesting competition at the moment between Postman and Rapid API. Rapid API used to be primarily an API marketplace, a place where you could discover lots of APIs, 35,000 APIs, and you could connect via your connection in Rapid API and integrate with all of these APIs. Fantastic. And Postman used to focus primarily on collaborative tools, on being able to sort of develop your API, test your API. Most recently, Rapid API acquired PAW, which was a kind of Postman for Mac. And they started kind of entering and competing with Postman around the API testing side of things. Simultaneously, Postman started building Postman Workspaces, and it describes itself as the first massively multiplayer API environment. So it has begun to encroach into Rapid API. You can now go to Postman Explore and find APIs and collections. There's only like, I think, under 2,000 APIs registered in Postman Explore, but there are, I can't remember how many million collections. So, so those are the two kind of main ecosystems for API collaboration and discovery, and Rapid API has API teams, etc. But where Rapid API has 35,000 APIs compared to Postman's under 2,000, Rapid API has only 3 million developers compared to Postman's 15 million developers. And it's been growing explosively. These millions just keep adding. I think there were 13 million last year and 11 million the year before. So when Postman says we are the massive multiplayer API building environment, they really do have an advantage. So it is worth, if you are working in APIs, it's worth really getting to know the Postman ecosystem that keeps growing. That's the other element. Every year they're adding more and more features. And I think the competition is making them more apt to offer freebies. So then the free tier has just gotten better. And it used to be that we were sort of limited in terms of the number of requests. Now you are still limited, but much, much less. I think if you have a smaller number of APIs, you can do unlimited requests, etc. But basically, the basic point is Postman is getting better and better and growing and growing. And Postman is designed for API-first development. It allows you to create your open API or your JSON schema or your GraphQL specification. And then from that specification, it will automatically generate documentation. But it will also, if you ask it, automatically generate a set of requests based on that specification, which will also allow you to automatically generate mock servers and production environments, which are essentially just global variables that allow you to kind of replace the endpoint or the domain with the ones that you want. It also allows you to add tests, behavior-driven tests into each request. And it allows you to add scripts before and after each request is run in JavaScript, which creates enormous flexibility and complexity and the ability to kind of do all kinds of hacks for functionality that Postman does not yet support out of the box. It also allows you to generate very powerful observability. It allows you to create monitors on each of your requests that run all the tests however often you want it, once a day, once every 10 minutes, once a week. And there is a kind of sort of limitation on the amount of requests that you can do for a free tier, for example. So that's how they monetize some of it. But basically, you are able to generate quite sophisticated tests and monitoring that gets sent to you and that integrates with your CI/CD pipeline. It also has a growing number of integrations. You can integrate with Datadog if you really want to go much deeper. You can integrate with GitLab and with GitHub. And so as you begin to add these integrations, the sophistication of what you can do in terms of security, monitoring, observability becomes much bigger. And you get sort of players that begin to offer, for example, pen testing services in Postman. So, and then one of the other key elements of Postman is that you are able to collaborate within Postman in a very, very rich way. So it's not just your developers. You can also have your marketing team. You can have various consumers all collaborate on specifications, on requirements, leave comments. And every change that you make to each API is versioned. So you can roll back and you can roll forward. And you can fork. You can create and you can start from an API, fork that API, and modify it without sort of damaging the parent API. And quite soon, they're about to introduce merge requests or pull requests. I can't remember what they're going to call it, but you will be able to make pull requests within Postman into your kind of core API. So it becomes more and more and more sophisticated. So Postman really, I think, is probably your best platform to master in order to be able to address some of the challenges that come with versioning, some of the challenges that come with observability, and some of the challenges that come with testing. And some of those are very sort of off-the-box, low-code solutions, but they also have a CLI tool called Newman that allows you to run a lot of the functionality of Postman on the command line, which integrates very well to CI/CD pipelines in more sophisticated ways. So the main point here is that part of that scalability of your API in terms of API specific as opposed to API adjacent criteria is developing also a tooling ecosystem that works for you. And Postman is probably the best first port of call. And the last bit that I wanted to briefly cover is Zapier. And I want to mention it because I think it is underknown and underexplored and undervalued perhaps by developers, because as consumers, Zapier is just if this, then that, isn't it? It's quite a simple thing where I can connect my API to your API and Bob's your uncle for third-party integrations. But actually, it's become much more sophisticated as time goes by as well. And it also has one of the top 5 or top 10 SEOs in the planet, which means that if you are interested in discoverability, so we've talked about observability, the discoverability of your API, which is part of that scaling up, you've created a fantastic API. How do you get people to use it? So one is put it on Rapid API in the marketplace there. Another one is listed on the GitHub awesome API lists. That's another great source of discoverability. But the more sophisticated approach is integrate with Zapier and become a full partner. Now, Zapier has kind of 2 levels of entry. So the way you get into Zapier is that you open up a developer account, and then you are able to connect your API to Zapier according to using either its kind of GUI, which is a very good platform. Actually, you can get extremely far with it. Or if you're going to seriously commit to Zapier, they also have a more sophisticated and granular CLI tool that allows you to actually version your entire Zapier code. It is all in JavaScript and uses a Zapier library, and then it can entirely live within your version control. And so you don't really have to enter the Zapier ecosystem except to kind of communicate via the CLI. But the GUI is actually really powerful and gets you very far. Now, there are, I think, 2 key gains to Zapier. One is that its integrations are often quite rich. So if you were to do, for example, a Google Calendar integration yourself, it's likely to take you a week or 2 to come up with a kind of basic Google Calendar integration. If you do Zapier, you can get Google Calendar with bells and whistles in a few hours. The same with many other things. So if you want quick and dirty, but not too dirty, because actually it's pretty clean and pretty sophisticated, Zapier has, I think, 3,000 integrations on its marketplace. So it is a huge way to add value very quickly. It also has sort of secure iframe. If that's, they call it a partner API, but it's actually sort of tightly secured iframe that allows you to sort of get people to go through the entire flow of sort of signing up to Zapier and integrating your app to their 3,000 external integrations without leaving your app, from within your app. So this, again, reduces a pain point. So you suddenly have that your app plays with thousands of integrations. And the last win is the one that I mentioned, which is discoverability. So if you become the stages that your API integration goes through is, first of all, when you create your developer account, your API is only accessible to yourself and to people that you personally invite. Once you've finished it and you are happy with what it does, you submit it to Zapier and it becomes a beta integration, which might be all you need. It says beta, but it's actually usable by anyone. However, it is not widely publicized. It's still by invitation only. And finally, once you've got 100 users of that beta app and you've got 10 zaps and you've got some instructions, it can become a full app in the Zapier marketplace. And then Zapier helps you market it. And if you Google anything that is on Zapier, the Zapier integration will come in first. And if Zapier does an article on your app, it will be seen by everyone. So your marketing department would love this as well at the level of observability. So that's the last bit that I wanted to touch around scalability, which is discoverability. And you have GitHub awesome lists, you have Rapid API marketplace, and you have Zapier and Postman Workspaces and Postman Explore, which are probably your main channels for getting discovered by the wide world, if that is what you want. So I think I will finish there and open up for discussion and questions. So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, please do hit me up on @dev-on-a-journey on Twitter. I'd be very grateful for some interaction.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Ismael, for that fantastic talk. That was great. So we've got everyone, we're in the Q&A session now, and we have a few questions already. So I think I'll just launch into those. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat and I'll address them. And just keep in mind, again, the 15-second lag between when we'll answer and you'll actually see it. Okay, so the first question is from Gariful and Michael, and he would like to ask about what do you think about using Pact Foundation as an integration test tool to validate contracts between multiple services? It seems to provide it provides more powerful tools for tests and mocks. So what are your thoughts on that?
Which foundation? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Pact Foundation, PACT.
Right. I have heard of it, but I've never used it. I think it's the honest answer. And in a sense, I think that's when I discussed Postman, it was really as an illustration. But I think what is important is that you have the right tooling. So I certainly found Postman wanting when it came to contract testing with OpenAPI of the sort of out of the box, for example. There were hacks where you could do a script where you would be able to pull in all kinds of things for the specification, but there wasn't anything equivalent to the sort of tiny, I forget the name of the testing app that plays well with Postman, but it was with JSON schema. When OpenAPI version 3 comes out fully, then that will play better. But I think Pact sounds like a really good thing. And the important thing is to have something, right? And to be able to, I think it's the broader point is what you mentioned, contract testing, which I didn't mention too much. And I think if that's a counterpoint to API first development, right? If your contract is going to be your single source of truth, your testing should ideally be very richly connected to your contract. So if Pact does that, it sounds great. I will definitely check it out in more detail after this.
Great, well, thank you for that. Another question here from Garfield, and it is, it seems that using just Postman without extensions isn't solid enough, in his opinion. So because he says that using Postman as load testing an API is quite complicated. Can you share experience about load testing your API?
Yes, I mean, I would also do it separately, I think. It sort of, I think, again, it would depend on your environment. Some people use load testing packages within their own app, and others go direct to the cloud. I think a lot of it depends on your scale as well, whether you're going to go, for example, to API gateway on AWS and have it off your mind, or whether you need a lot more granular state. But I think that's one of those examples that I meant as API adjacent, right? That is something that you would need to do regardless of your API design. That's more to do with your infrastructure and your needs.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're just waiting for some more questions to come in, but while we're waiting, I would be interested to discuss API design gotchas. So things to watch out for when to do certain things. A short story: I worked for a startup years ago. We tried to go API first. There was a lot of overhead in doing that. It's just naturally you don't get API first for free. And the problem is that we were a very young startup with a rapidly evolving and changing API. So this just added overhead. So when do you think is the appropriate time to do it? What stage of the product or the evolution of the system? And potentially what kind of gotchas have you found in that space?
Honestly, I think it's worth you doing at any stage, right? In fact, the earliest the better. But I think it's how much detail you go into it. That's what I was saying before, right? If you try to over-predict and over-spec at the beginning, then that will bite you because you cannot predict the future and users will require and demand something different. But I think you can still take an API-first approach in terms of, again, the key principles, right? For it to be predictable, for it to be platform independent, etc. So it might be that you have less endpoints. It might be that the data that you're returning is less. But I do think that the overhead is likely to be paid off over time, right? In other words, when you skip that overhead, I think very often what will happen is that you'll have to rebuild your API, and that's fine, right? You're just front loading or the overhead versus not, and that may be the case, right? If you're a startup, you've got it's you and your mate, and actually, what you want is your product out because you want investment, and once the investors come in, you'll be able to sort of to grow it. I know one incubator, for example, that has planned into the teams that it supports, it plans a complete rebuild of their apps if they're successful. So the first stage is adoption, and the next stage is a complete ground-up rebuild. So if that's your model, then you want to take that approach in a very minimalistic way. If, on the other hand, you are trying to build something that is likely to be robust, then it is probably worth starting with that overhead, just planning for it really, and then growing around it. So I think in general, that's I wouldn't say there's a bad time to do API first. There's just too much or too little of it, perhaps.
Good answer. Thank you for that. That was great. Okay, well, just some comments here. One is thank you for the nice presentation and the gorgeous answers.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for that. And yeah, just for myself, like I've used Zapier as well. I keep pronouncing it as if it's French for some reason. My brain just does that. It's weird. I keep calling it Zapier, but it's not. But it took ages for me to stop doing that normally. But I've used it for quite a few projects, and like integrating, say, with Trello and using that to trigger certain actions. And it's a fantastic way to integrate lots of systems together. So yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what kind of integrations have you played within it, or what's some of the things you've done with it that you think are cool or fun?
I guess I find the idea of the 3000 marketplace cool in itself. One of the things I love about APIs is this kind of one to rule them all. It's really like acquiring superpowers, and it's also a bit like cheating, a bit like having a backstage pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like I could spend 2 weeks building this integration. There was something satisfying in, in the example of Google Calendar, of that it took me a couple of hours to outperform the integration that my team had done on Google Calendar, 3 months before. So, but I think in particular, I do like the next stage. I do like the API, the CLI version. Mm. I think it's really interesting. There's something really nice about the speed of being able to develop in the GUI and just going to the little code snippets that allow you to use JavaScript to kind of tweak. But there's also something really powerful to know that you own the entire thing, that you actually can create much more fine-grained testing in particular, for example. So at the moment, I think Zapier does the test in the GUI. You depend on Zapier to do the testing, and it's very good. But if you version it yourself, suddenly all of Zapier exists within your CI/CD. I think that's pretty cool as well.
That is, no, I actually think that's the direction things are going. Excuse me. That's the direction I think things are going. Less and less us custom building and reinventing the wheel, and more reusing existing pieces and using Zapier and systems as the piping and integration between them. And if we can throw the testing in there as well, so that we have confidence in our integrations, that's just a game changer.
Yeah, it is. And it just feels to me like we're on the cusp. I feel like there's this very, very rapid development. And I suspect that in the next 4 to 5 years, it's going to settle, and it's going to be good and bad. It's like, the mega beast, once what Postman scales, Postman still feels a little bit beta. It still feels a little bit like, it kind of stumbled into something much bigger than it knew, and it kind of went, whoa, let's do this. But it's not doing it yet. It's still a few years from there. There are also some tools that I didn't mention that I find really fun. There's Symfony devs will have used API platform, and that's a really fantastic tool to kind of develop your APIs and integrate particularly with Doctrine. And they're soon going to be supporting this year, I believe, Laravel as well. But I wanted to make a plug for a very new Laravel app called Vemto that I love. It's a beautiful sort of design app that it's a code generator for Laravel, but actually, even if I wasn't using it for Laravel, it creates these very beautiful graphical interfaces where you are able to kind of design your API around first of all, you can design your database structure, and then press play, and it will generate all of your sort of API endpoints that then you can use for Laravel, or you can just use for your specification, as it were. But it's a really beautiful app, and I think this is where we're moving. We're moving toward an ecosystem that makes API design a mixture of low code and advanced level, a bit like with Zapier, some low code sort of environment that anyone can get productive very quickly, and then sort of more ownership and control.
That's right. Well, hopefully that is where things will go, because it'll be a much more rich ecosystem for us to connect and use, which will make developing products faster in future, hopefully.
Sure. Although I also think it will give us new headaches.
100%.
I think we'll be more as we intertwine with others, the versioning nightmares will chase us. No, there will be more
Oh yeah,
mashups
no.
that chase and kill us.
Listen, let's not get into the can of worms that is versioning. We'll be here all night.
Sure.
I think that should be maybe a talk for a future talk would be good on that, because it is a topic that is worthy of it. So Ismael, just to say thank you so much for giving a talk and answering questions. That was great. Really enjoyed that. I just want to say to everyone that's watching, first of all, thank you for attending. It's great to have you all here, and thank you for your questions. I'd just like to say that we have the next meetup organized. We have Larry Garfield, who is going to be talking about arrays in PHP and how we shouldn't use them. It's going to be a little ranty. Can't wait. So that will be in I think it's about 4 weeks. I'll announce the meetup shortly after this. And just like to say, if anybody would like to give a talk or anything like that, just reach out to us on our Twitter account. Just send us a message, a DM, and we'll make that happen. And yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you so much for watching. And Ismael, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Best luck, everyone. And we have ended the stream.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for